8% to 15%. Mr. Speaker, as we talk today, the country is not doing very well economically. And there are two issues. Either we tax or we borrow. The budget ceiling, Mr. Speaker, as we talk, is around 9.4 trillion Kenya shillings. And the ceiling that this House, and then I voted during the handshake arrangement, against was 10 trillion Kenya shillings, Mr. Speaker. We are looking at a budget of 3.6 trillion Kenya shillings, Mr. Speaker. Our public debt is no longer sustainable. Therefore, the fact that 8% has been increased to 15% on VAT, Mr. Speaker, is very critical in the growth of the economy. We either choose to go to countries like Canada, Ethiopia, not sorry, Ghana, Ethiopia, and other countries who have default in terms of payment, in terms of public debt that we have internationally, Mr. Speaker. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, the issue of fuel subsidy. Who are these people? Mr. Speaker, as we talk today, there are many companies who are well connected that benefited from fuel subsidy. Mr. Speaker, who are the beneficiaries? Mr. Speaker, when you look, and I remember we censured as CS of Energy in the last session because of misuse and abuse of fuel subsidy, and then, Mr. Speaker, because what you are having is specific petrol stations who are selling fuel like a happy hour, Mr. Speaker, for people who add things more than water, and they were not in a position to tell us who are these, Mr. Speaker. As we talk today, there are many companies that want to be paid because they gave fuel subsidy, Mr. Speaker. That process was abused. Mr. Speaker, any sane economic person, the fuel and unga subsidy should be removed because it was not sustainable, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it behooves all of us, Mr. Speaker, that we cannot survive on subsidy, Mr. Speaker. Look, for example, we better subsidize production over consumption. Because if you are talking about food security, for example, we better give farmers in Nyamira, Mr. Speaker, subsidized fertilizer to produce more of ndizi to be consumed in Nairobi, as opposed as giving unga that is subsidized, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, this statement by Senator Amida, with all due respect, of course the committee will dispense with, but in my own opinion, fuel subsidy was abused, Mr. Speaker. The international economists, the IMF, everybody has said you cannot live on subsidy. It is like living on Fulisa. You cannot live on Fulisa, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, when the finance bill, I would have wished to listen to the comments of Senator Amida when the finance bill will come before the floor of the House, because we need to raise our local revenue. We don't raise, we borrow more. We borrow more, the country, Mr. Speaker, will be sold reja like mitumba in some markets, Mr. Speaker. And we don't want, Mr. Speaker, to come here buying a loaf of bread, come with like 10 kilos of 100 shillings, Mr. Speaker, because our currency has been devalued, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, I think on a point of information, Mr. Speaker, Senator Amida is doing very well in many things, but I think on this one, I beg to disagree, because fuel subsidy has been abused, and the government under President William Ruto has done very well to remove any form of subsidy and cut down even on this budget, Mr. Speaker. I have seen, Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, there are many, and I hate to reply these things, Mr. Speaker, because I have seen our colleagues from the other aisle in Disco Matangas. I'm told there's Disco Matanga. My younger brother, Senator Rafael Chimera, was there describing how Disco Matangas happens. He's in a better place, or birthday parties or baby showers. Mr. Speaker, we need to be honest to the country in conclusion. There is a misnomer that counties, their money was slashed, Mr. Speaker. In the financial year 2021-2022, for new members, we fought here. I remember Senator Faki was here, Senator Okongo Mugende was here. We fought and gave counties 370 billion. We have fought an increment of 15.3 billion addition. That is 385 billion, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, counties will get conditional grants of 44 billion. Counties will get 429 billion in both equitable shareable revenue and in conditional grants, Mr. Speaker. So I want to ask our colleagues, I know as politicians, when you see microphone and media, you decide to be excited, Mr. Speaker, simply because you want to please your crowd. But let us be honest, Mr. Speaker.
What is your point of order, Senator Faki?
Mr. Speaker, sir, the Honorable Senator for Nandi is misleading the House in saying that the counties are going to get 425 billion. 425 billion in conditional grants, Mr. Speaker. What the DORA said, Mr. Speaker, is that the counties are going to share 385 billion, 425 million Kenya shillings. There was nothing like 425 billion in that DORA, which was passed by this House and assented by the President, I think 3 weeks ago. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Cheregei.
Mr. Speaker,
Are you misleading?
No, I'm not misleading,
Are your
Mr.
figures
Speaker.
factual?
It is as factual, Mr. Speaker, it is as factual as the second coming of Jesus Christ. Mr. Speaker, it is very important. And you know, Mr. Speaker, when we are in this forum, we learn. And I request we learn. I learn from colleagues, they learn from me. I said very well that the President, we ascended 385.3 billion under equitable shareable revenue. Under conditional grants, and with the law we passed here, Mr. Speaker, we passed 44 billion. It comes to 429 billion. Mr. Speaker, it is like having money in equity and KCB. It is your money. So I think Senator Faki, Mr. Speaker, should stop consulting Sergeant at Arms and listen keenly, Mr. Speaker, because I am making a life-changing statement so that they don't mislead the public in these Komatangas, Mr. Speaker. It is 429.5 billion, Mr. Speaker, that is going to counties. And I want to beg our colleagues, the answer will bear as witness. We can say other things for political expediency, but facts will remain as stubborn as it is, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, I want to raise there and hope when this issue of VAT will come up, Mr. Speaker, I will want to also sit, because you remember, Mr. Speaker, I asked a question about fuel subsidy. Mr. Speaker, you saw the Daily Nation yesterday. 62 billion was lost. And among of it is under fuel subsidy. And the person who was making a lot of noise yesterday in Congress Course was the person who presided the loss of 62 billion. So since some of the side that are asking about VAT, they should be asking Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga where 62 billion that was meant on fuel subsidies, Mr. Speaker. We cannot lie to this country. I think the era of lies, Mr. Speaker, must stop, because 62 billion, Mr. Speaker, cannot be accounted, Mr. Speaker. And therefore I support, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
What is